Welcome to episode 10 of the MBT podcast. In the previous episode, we discussed session 8, titled Mentalization-Based Treatment Part 1. In this episode, we will continue with session 9. And I want you to think about the last time you were sitting across from someone you cared about.
Right, someone important to you.
Yeah, exactly. And you were just about to tell them this really deep, dark secret. Like maybe you were about to admit a huge failure or profound insecurity or just something you were deeply ashamed of.
That moment right before you jump off the cliff.
Yes. Your heart rate spikes, your palms get all clammy, your breathing becomes super shallow, and right at the very last second, when the words are literally on the tip of your tongue, you make a joke.
You completely deflect.
Right. You deflect, you change the subject entirely, and you have to wonder, why does your own brain treat emotional honesty like you are stepping blindly into oncoming traffic?
It's a great question, and it's really the ultimate paradox of therapy.
And honestly, of human connection in general, right? I mean, you absolutely have to open up to heal, but the very process of opening up triggers our most primal, deeply rooted fears of rejection.
It is this profound, almost cruel biological contradiction because you consciously decide to enter a treatment space that is explicitly designed for vulnerability.
You want to get better. You want that connection.
Exactly. But your central nervous system, it does not care about your conscious intentions at all.
It's just entirely focused on survival.
Right. The moment true emotional exposure is required, your instinctual evolutionary reaction is to just build an impenetrable fortress.
I love that we are starting right in the messy reality of this for our deep dive today. Because whether you are actively sitting a group therapy circle or just navigating a tricky friendship where someone is pulling away.
Or even romantic relationships.
Yeah, like trying to figure out why you always start a massive fight with your romantic partner the exact moment things get too intimate. This deep dive is really going to serve as a masterclass in understanding the invisible mechanics of your own relationships.
We are going to examine the exact gears and levers that cause us to pull away right when we actually should be leaning in.
And what is truly fascinating about the publications on MBT, mentalization-based treatment, is how they take these incredibly uncomfortable, agonizing feelings we all experience when trying to build a bond, and they just completely strip away the shame attached to them.
They establish a very clear, unapologetic premise right from the jump.
Which is so refreshing.
It really is. Yeah. They basically say your resistance to opening up is not a failure. It's not a sign that you are broken or a quote-unquote bad patient or that you're doing the therapy wrong.
That resistance is the raw material. It is the exact substance the therapy is actually designed to manipulate and work with.
Exactly. The resistance isn't in the way of the therapy. The resistance is the therapy.
Okay, let's unpack that. Let's dig into the mechanics of it. Because looking back at the recap of Session 8 in the publications on MBT, the foundational premise is that the therapeutic relationship is absolutely necessary.
Right. You cannot do this in a vacuum.
No, you have to build real, tangible relationships with your therapists and your fellow group members. And the texts stress that psychotherapy demands talking about your most intimate, closely guarded thoughts and feelings.
But in the exact same breath, there is this explicit, almost blunt warning.
Yeah, they basically say there will be moments you absolutely cannot or simply will not open up. It's treated as a total inevitability.
They are exceedingly upfront about this baseline reality. Because, if you do not eventually open up, the treatment cannot help you.
Right.
But the pivot they make is what sets this whole MBT framework apart. They highlight that the specific moments when you feel the overwhelming urge to withdraw, when you feel the walls slamming down and the lock turning, those are actually the most critical windows of opportunity in the entire process.
It's like trying to clean a deep wound. The only way to stop the infection, the only way to actually heal, is to get in there and scrub it.
Which hurts a lot.
Right. And your body's immediate pain response screams at you to pull your hand away. So the therapy requires you to actively override your own psychological nervous system.
Or to use another analogy, it's like going to the gym, looking at the really heavy weights, and just deciding to go home because lifting them is hard.
Yeah, but the resistance is the workout. You have to push against it. But let's break down the why of this. Like, why is the immediate human instinct to run away when we are asked to share something intimate?
Why does the brain conflate talking about our feelings with a physical threat?
Exactly.
Well, to understand that, we have to look at the evolutionary biology of human survival.
Okay, taking it way back.
Way back. For hundreds of thousands of years, social rejection was not just an emotional bummer. It was a literal death sentence.
Wow. Yeah, because if you were cast out of the tribe, you were on your own.
Exactly. You starved, or you were eaten by predators. There was no surviving alone.
Hmm.
So our brains evolved to treat social cohesion as a matter of absolute literal survival.
So the stakes are as high as they can possibly be.
Right. The amygdala, the part of the brain that acts as your internal alarm system, it does not perfectly distinguish between a saber-toothed tiger jumping out of the bushes and, say, the fear of a therapist or a group member judging you for your deepest insecurities.
The brain just registers threat, full stop.
Precisely. Threat is threat. When you share an intimate thought, you are essentially handing someone else a weapon.
Oh, that's a heavy way to look at it.
But it's true. You are giving them the power to judge you, to reject you, or to deeply misunderstand you. And in a heightened emotional state, especially for individuals who already struggle with personality disorders or deep relational trauma, the brain registers that vulnerability as an existential life or death threat.
So the urge to hide, to deflect, or to become suddenly enraged is just your psychological immune system kicking into overdrive to save your life.
That's exactly what it is. It's trying to protect you.
So the therapy is basically asking you to deliberately and repeatedly walk into a space that your brain is actively flagging as a lethal danger zone.
And what the clinicians are trying to communicate to the patient is that this physiological and psychological urge to flee should be observed as incredibly valuable data.
Right, don't just ignore the panic. Look at it.
Exactly. The moment you are sitting in the chair and you think, I can't talk about this, I need to get out of here, the therapy hasn't failed. The therapy has just begun.
It is an invitation to examine the mechanism of your own fear. Like asking yourself, why do I feel threatened right now in this specific room with these specific people?
Which is a really hard question to ask when your heart is pounding.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
But extrapolating that to the listener's everyday life makes this so relatable. I mean, think about a conversation with a friend that starts getting a little too real.
I've all been there.
You are about to share something you are genuinely struggling with. Maybe you are failing at work or your marriage is really struggling and you feel that familiar tightening in your chest.
Fortress walls going up.
Yeah. And suddenly, instead of sharing, you just make a self-deprecating joke, or you physically cross your arms, lean back, and ask them about their weekend instead.
You shut it down.
Right. And it seems like catching yourself in that microscopic moment of friction, recognizing the deflection before it fully takes over, is really the first major hurdle of mentalizing.
Recognizing the friction without bolting for the door is a monumental victory. Because mentalizing, at its core, is the ability to understand that your mind and someone else's mind are two completely separate entities.
They aren't reading your mind and you aren't reading theirs.
Exactly. Both minds are driven by hidden feelings, past traumas, and underlying intentions. But when the friction hits, your ability to mentalize usually just collapses.
You become absolutely certain that everyone is judging you.
Yes. And what's fascinating is that the publications on MBT don't just leave this at a vague philosophical fear of vulnerability. They get highly specific and clinical about the exact barriers that block connection in the therapy room.
Yeah, they provide this really fascinating list of common themes that make it nearly impossible to build a bond. And the very first set of barriers they tackle relates directly to the therapist.
The structural asymmetry of the
It
relationship.
really is the elephant in the room of all psychotherapy.
It is. It's totally bizarre if you really think about it.
The materials outline these highly specific, completely understandable anxieties that patients feel about bonding with the person sitting across from them with the notepad. And I really want to unpack these one by one because they are incredibly validating.
Let's do it.
Okay, number one. The relationship is inherently temporary. Like, you know from the very first handshake that this relationship has an expiration date.
It's a built-in ending.
Right. Imagine trying to make a best friend in the real world, pouring your absolute heart out to them, while knowing with absolute certainty that in exactly 18 months, they will permanently vanish from your life.
The anticipation of loss is literally built into the foundation of the alliance.
Which sounds agonizing.
For someone with attachment trauma, asking them to invest deeply in a bond that is legally required to end is akin to asking them to willingly break their own heart.
Okay, then there's number 2 and number 3 on the list, which kind of bleed into each other. Therapists rarely share personal information, yet they expect the patient to share absolutely everything.
The one-way mirror effect.
Yeah, and paired with that is the fear that the therapist doesn't genuinely care about you at all, but is only acting empathetic because it's their job, you know? They're on the clock. and they are being paid.
The transactional nature of therapeutic care.
Okay, I have to push back on this whole setup on behalf of the patient, because honestly, this sounds incredibly unfair and unnatural.
It is unnatural.
If I am sitting in a room pouring out the most shameful details of my childhood to a person who won't even tell me if they own a dog, and I am paying them $200 an hour to just nod and look sympathetic,
You're going to feel some kind of way about that.
I am not going to magically project my insecurities onto them. I'm just going to rationally conclude that they are a cold, transactional professional who doesn't actually care about me, and I'm going to walk out.
That makes total sense.
Right. How is a patient supposed to form a genuine human connection in a relationship that is fundamentally one-sided? Isn't the patient right to be suspicious? In the real world, a one-sided relationship where one person extracts secrets and gives nothing back is considered toxic, not therapeutic.
Well, your reaction is completely irrational, and it is the exact reaction the publications on MBT anticipate.
So they know it's weird.
Oh, absolutely. The patient is absolutely reacting to an artificial, unnatural social construct. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, the asymmetry is not a flaw in the design. It is the fundamental diagnostic tool.
The weirdness is the point.
Yes. The therapist intentionally acts as a semi-blank slate. They maintain rigorous professional boundaries, they withhold personal anecdotes, and they actively resist the urge to jump in and say, "Oh, I totally get that. My mother did the exact same thing."
Because if the therapist acts like a normal friend, they pollute the data.
Precisely. Think about it. If the therapist acts like a warm, overly disclosing friend who constantly reassures you, maybe buys you a coffee, shares their own weekend plans, your core fears and anxieties might just stay dormant.
You would just treat them like a buddy.
Right. You'd have a nice chat. But by maintaining that neutral professional boundary, the therapist becomes a mirrored screen. The patient is essentially forced to project their own internal world onto that screen.
Okay, let's walk through the mechanics of that projection. How does my entirely logical fear that my therapist is just doing it for the money actually force me to mentalize?
Okay, let's build a scenario. Let's say you are in a session and you sit in silence for 3 minutes.
A long time in therapy.
A very long time.
Mm-hmm.
The therapist just looks at you neutrally. They don't fill the space. Your brain, which is desperate to make sense of the silence, frantically searches its database of past experiences.
Trying to figure out what the silence means.
Right. Now, if your core, internalized belief from childhood is that you are fundamentally unlovable and a burden to others, you will look at the therapist's perfectly neutral face and you will read boredom.
Oh, wow.
You will think to yourself, they are only sitting here because I am paying them. They're disgusted by my silence. They're probably counting the minutes until the hour is up.
So you completely fill the blank slate with your own worst nightmare.
Exactly. The therapist hasn't actually done anything to indicate boredom. The boredom is entirely generated from within you.
That's wild.
So eventually the therapist will invite you to explore the silence. They might ask something simple like, what was happening in your mind just now?
And then you confess that you are certain they only care because of the money.
Right. And here's the crucial part. The therapist doesn't get defensive. They don't pull out their degrees or their track record to prove they really care.
They don't try to talk you out of it.
No. They simply ask, what makes you so certain of that?
They force you to look at the scaffolding of your own assumption.
Yes. They force you to separate your internal feeling of being unlovable from the external reality of the therapist's actual intentions. It forces you to mentalize. It forces you to recognize that your assumption about the therapist's internal state might not be an objective fact.
It is a projection.
Exactly. And if you can realize in real time that you just invented an entire scenario where the therapist hates you, you begin to realize how often you do that in the real world.
With your spouse, your boss, your friends.
All the time. The unnatural structure of the therapeutic relationship is essentially a laboratory setting. It isolates the variable of your own attachment style so it can be observed under a microscope.
So the blank slate actually reveals your own mind to you.
It does. But as the materials point out with deep empathy, it is incredibly difficult to navigate this while you are actually trapped in the emotional storm of it.
Oh, I can imagine. It requires the patient to have a monumental amount of trust in a process that, by its very design, feels inherently untrustworthy and withholding.
It's a huge ask.
And the complexity multiplies exponentially, right? Because MBT isn't just one-on-one. The publications emphasize that this is often group therapy.
Which changes everything.
Yeah, we have to transition from the specific focused fears about the therapist to the incredibly chaotic, complex web of fears surrounding the other members of the group.
The group dynamic introduces a staggering new layer of difficulty to the nature of attachment. You are no longer just dealing with a highly trained professional who knows how to be a blank slate.
Right.
You are dealing with a room full of other dysregulated individuals who are actively projecting their own trauma everywhere.
It sounds like an emotional minefield. And the materials list these powerful internal fears that arise as bonds actually begin to strengthen within the group. Not when things are going badly, but when the therapy starts working.
When people start getting close.
Yeah. And some of these concepts really stopped me in my tracks. Like, they mention the fear of abandonment and rejection, which, is standard. But then they mention the fear that things will go wrong specifically because the bond is strong.
The anticipation of the fall.
Exactly.
The higher you climb the ladder of intimacy, the farther you have to drop when it inevitably breaks. So being close actually feels more dangerous than being distant.
That makes a tragic sort of sense. They also list the anxiety of having to care for others and the pressure of wondering if you must bond with and actively like everyone in the group.
Both very real fears.
And then there's the trap of attachment, this overwhelming desire for more contact, like wanting to call the therapist the second you feel even slightly distressed. And finally, the sheer difficulty of expressing negative things directly to someone's face.
It is a comprehensive anatomy of what they call the terrifying burden of attachment.
The terrifying burden, that phrase really stuck with me because we are so conditioned by pop psychology and self-help books to view attachment as this warm, comforting blanket, right?
Connection is supposed to be the cure for everything.
Exactly. But the publications on MBT explicitly frame getting close to people as a heavy, dangerous, exhausting burden. Why? Why does something like the anxiety of having to care for others become a barrier to healing?
Let's build another scenario to see how this actually operates in a room full of people.
Okay, let's do it.
Imagine a patient in the group. Let's call her Lisa.
Oh.
Lisa has spent her entire life emotionally isolated to protect herself from her very volatile family. She joins an MBT group. For the first few months, she stays quiet, defensive, detached.
Just observing, keeping her walls up.
Right. But slowly, she starts to do the work. She starts participating. And she builds a genuine bond with another group member. Let's call him Mark. She finally feels understood by someone. The warmth of attachment actually begins.
So the therapy is working. This is a good thing.
Yes, but attachment is a dual-edged sword. When you are totally isolated, you might be desperately lonely, but you are autonomous.
You're safe in your bubble.
Exactly. Your emotional weather is generated entirely by you. But the moment Lisa attaches to Mark, her nervous system becomes linked to his.
Oh, I see where this is going.
2 weeks later, Mark comes into the group session absolutely devastated. He is relapsed, or maybe he lost his job, and he is just spiraling into a deep, dark depression.
And Lisa, who is probably barely keeping her own head above water in this therapy, suddenly feels the immense gravitational pull of Mark's despair.
Exactly. She is suddenly burdened with his pain because she cares about him. For someone who already struggles profoundly with emotional regulation, the idea of taking on someone else's emotional baggage feels like it will literally snap her spine.
It isn't that Lisa is selfish or lacks empathy.
Not at all. It is that her emotional capacity is already completely maxed out, just trying to keep herself alive. The sudden realization that caring about Mark means I suffer when Mark suffers, it is terrifying.
So her brain's solution to avoid that secondary suffering is to simply cut the cord.
Yes. Pull away from Mark. Destroy the bond so you don't have to carry his weight.
Wow. And that connects directly to the fear of dependency, what the text calls the trap of attachment. Because when Lisa finally found someone who understood her, the relief was probably intoxicating.
But that relief brings a terrifying new reality. She now needs him.
Right. And the text specifically mentioned the urge to contact the therapist the moment you feel a little bit bad, that intense craving for their soothing presence.
It is the terror of losing your autonomy. You fear that if you let yourself truly rely on this therapist or on this group, you will completely lose the ability to soothe yourself.
You'll forget how to stand on your own 2 feet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You worry you will fall apart completely if they go on vacation or just don't answer the phone one afternoon. You become terrified of the magnitude of your own neediness.
So the vulnerability paradox strikes again. You withdraw, you build the fortress back up, specifically to protect yourself from the unbearable vulnerability of needing another human being.
It's a preemptive strike against your own dependency.
Okay, what about the pressure regarding the rest of the group? The publications on MBT mention the fear that you have to like everyone in the room. I found this fascinating because a therapy group is really just a pressurized microcosm of society.
It absolutely is.
You don't get to choose your coworkers or your extended family, and you don't get to choose who sits in the circle with you on a Tuesday afternoon.
It is forced intimacy with total strangers. And in any random grouping of humans, there will be personalities that just naturally clash.
Of course.
But in group therapy, the implicit, overarching rule is that you're all there to support each other. You are supposed to open the darkest rooms of your mind to these people.
Right, which is fine if you like them, but what if you don't?
Exactly. What happens if the man sitting across from Lisa reminds her, maybe just through his tone of voice or his mannerisms of her abusive father? Or what if she just finds him deeply, irritatingly arrogant?
The cognitive dissonance must be deafening. She's sitting there thinking, I am mandated by this treatment to be totally vulnerable, but my body is screaming at me that I actively despise the person sitting 3 feet away from me.
And the burden of attachment demands to know. What do you do with that? Do you fake it? Do you pretend to like him to keep the peace of the group, thereby sacrificing your own authenticity?
Or do you look him in the eye and express that negative feeling directly to his face?
And the text explicitly notes how incredibly difficult it is to express negative things directly. It's so uncomfortable.
Most people would never do that.
Most people will choose the path of least resistance.
Yeah.
They will shut down, stop participating, and eventually just drop out of the therapy altogether.
And they'll probably just say the group wasn't a good fit.
Exactly. They won't say it was because they couldn't stand that one guy.
Extrapolating this to the listener's daily life, this framework explains so much about the phenomenon of self-sabotage. I mean, think about it. Have you ever had a new friendship or started dating someone and everything was going perfectly?
It was going too well.
Exactly. There were no red flags. It was peaceful. And out of nowhere, you suddenly pick a massive fight over something totally trivial. Or you just ghost them entirely.
Which aligns perfectly with the text's concept of the fear that it will go wrong because the bond is strong.
You are preemptively detonating the relationship because the sheer anticipation of it inevitably breaking in the future is just too stressful for your nervous system to endure in the present.
You blow it up on your own terms. It gives you the illusion of control.
Yeah.
If you destroy the relationship yourself, you don't have to sit around agonizing over when they're going to drop the hammer and abandon you.
You beat them to the punch.
It is a brilliant, albeit totally tragic, defense mechanism designed to manage the terror of the unknown.
Wow. Okay, so we have established these absolutely monumental barriers to connection. The fear of the therapist's blank slate, the crushing burden of caring for others' emotions, the terror of becoming dependent, the urge to preemptively destroy good things, the cognitive dissonance of forced intimacy.
It's a lot.
It's a mountain to climb. If the brain is fighting this hard against the treatment, how does MBT actually solve this in a room full of people? Like, how do we take this high-level psychological theory and make it work on a Tuesday afternoon with 6 highly defensive, terrified people sitting in a circle?
This is where we shift from the anatomy of the problem to the highly specific mechanics of the intervention itself. How do they actually operationalize this theory?
The publications emphasize that MBT group therapy places an uncompromising, relentless focus on the quote-unquote here and now.
The immediate present.
Right. They are not overly interested in dissecting your childhood trauma from 20 years ago while you sit in the group. They care about what is happening in the room, in real time, in this exact second, between the members and the therapists.
And the text describes practicing this real-time understanding of yourself, the other person, and the relationship as the most difficult thing there is.
Why is it so difficult?
Because it demands a level of present moment, hypervigilant emotional awareness that most of us spend our entire adult lives actively numbing ourselves against. We don't want to look that closely at the present moment.
We'd rather be distracted.
Exactly.
So to manage this cauldron of emotion, the materials explain that MBT therapists are highly active. They do not just sit back in a leather chair, stroke their chins, and wait for the hour to end.
No, they are very involved.
They will aggressively pause the conversation, they will slow down the pace of the room, and they will literally rewind what is happening between the group members.
The rewind function is arguably the most crucial defining technical intervention in the entire MBT framework.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Reading about this rewind function, the image that immediately jumped into my mind was a referee reviewing an instant replay in a chaotic sports match.
Oh, that's a great visual.
Right. Like the play happens, there's a massive tangle of players on the field, elbows are thrown, whistles blow, and the referee runs over to the monitor on the sidelines. They tell the whole stadium, hold on, let's rewind the tape, let's look at the exact second when the foul occurred. What actually happened in that fraction of a second?
It is a very strong analogy, but I would add one critical twist to it.
What's that?
A referee in a sports match is looking for a rule violation. They are trying to find out who is objectively at fault so they can issue a penalty or a card. In MBT, the therapist isn't looking for who broke the rules or who started the fight.
They aren't trying to assign blame.
No. They're looking for the exact microscopic millisecond where someone's internal world distorted external reality. They're looking for the exact moment mentalizing collapsed.
Okay, walk me through a concrete scenario of how this rewind actually happens in the room. Let's use two hypothetical group members. Let's call them Sarah and John.
Okay, Sarah and John. So Sarah is in the middle of sharing something quite painful about her week. She is taking a risk. She is being genuinely vulnerable.
She's doing the work.
Yes. And across the circle, John suddenly shifts in his chair, looks away, and checks his watch.
Just a tiny, almost imperceptible physical movement.
Right, in the real world, you might not even notice it. But in the crucible of the therapy group, it is a massive event.
Why?
Because in standard conversation, when a vulnerable feeling is met with what looks like disinterest, the human brain speeds up to an astonishing degree. We operate on pure defensive autopilot.
So everything goes into fast forward.
Yes. The moment John looks at his watch, Sarah's visual cortex registers the movement. Her thalamus routes that information directly to her amygdala.
The alarm system.
Exactly. And based on her past trauma, maybe being ignored by her parents, her amygdala instantly sounds a catastrophic alarm.
Yeah.
Within half a second, her brain processes the data as John is bored, John is disgusted by I am worthless, I need to protect myself immediately.
The prefrontal cortex, the logical reasoning part of the brain, doesn't even have time to boot up.
It is completely bypassed. It's completely offline. So in the very next second, Sarah abruptly stops her story, glares at John, and snaps. Well, clearly John has better things to do than listen to my pathetic life.
Ouch. And John.
John, who is completely caught off guard by this, instantly feels attacked. His own defense mechanisms flare up, and he snaps back, I wasn't doing anything, you're just being dramatic.
And boom. Within 3 seconds, the entire group dynamic has fractured into total hostility.
Exactly. And normally in a regular argument, or honestly even in traditional talk therapy, the group would now spend the next 20 minutes arguing about the snap.
They would argue about the fight that just happened.
Yes. Sarah would justify her anger, John would defend his innocence, and absolutely nothing would be resolved.
Because they would be arguing about the secondary emotion, right?
Yeah.
The anger.
Yes. The anger is just the smoke. The MBT therapist steps in, blows the whistle, and flat out refuses to let them argue about the smoke.
They stop the play.
The therapist says, stop. Let's pause right here. Let's rewind the tape. We are not talking about the argument. Sarah, let's go back 30 seconds. Before you got angry, John looked at his watch. What happened in your mind in that tiny fraction of a second before you spoke?
Why is slowing it down to that micro level so crucial? What does forcing Sarah to look at that half second actually achieve?
It forces the prefrontal cortex back online. By slowing time down, you bypass the amygdala's alarm system. The therapist is essentially forcing the group to stay in the incredibly uncomfortable here and now.
They can't escape into the anger.
Right. When you dissect the micro-interaction before the anger or the withdrawal can fully take over the narrative, you are catching the failure of mentalization at its absolute source.
So Sarah is forced to sit in the discomfort and actually articulate. When John looked at his watch, I felt an intense, crushing wave of panic that I was boring him and that everyone in this room wishes I would stop talking.
That is the raw material right there. And notice what the therapist does not do in this moment.
What don't they do?
The therapist doesn't jump in and say, oh, Sarah, don't be silly. You aren't boring at all. We love listening to you.
Oh, because that would be false reassurance.
Exactly. Which doesn't actually help her build the skill of mentalizing. Instead, the therapist turns the investigation over to John. The therapist asks, John, we just heard what Sarah experienced. Let's look at your tape. What was actually happening in your mind in an exact second when you looked at your watch?
And John, who is now forced to examine his own present moment, might say something like, I have to take my anxiety medication exactly at 4 p.m., and I suddenly panicked that I had missed the time. I wasn't even processing what Sarah was saying. I was entirely caught up in my own head.
Boom. It is active, real-time, undeniable mentalizing.
It proves to Sarah, with empirical evidence right in front of her face, that her assumption about John's internal state was factually incorrect.
Her feeling of rejection was entirely real. Her body really felt the panic. But the premise that caused the feeling was flawed.
That is so powerful, because by rewinding the tape constantly, session after session, the therapist is basically installing a new software program in the patient's minds.
They are training the patients to start doing it for themselves. The ultimate goal is that eventually, out in the real world, when Sarah's boss looks at his watch during meeting, Sarah will hit her own internal pause button.
She will feel this spike of panic, but before she snaps at her boss or just quits her job in a huff, she will think, wait, what else could this mean? Am I certain he is bored, or is it possible he just has another meeting to get to?
That pause is everything.
But doing this in real time with multiple highly reactive people in a room must be exhausting. The therapist has to be tracking everyone's micro-expressions, shifts in body language, and sudden drops in the energy of the room simultaneously.
No wonder the text calls it the most difficult thing there is. It is incredibly taxing for everyone involved.
The mental load is huge.
It requires the patients to be willing to endure the profound discomfort of having their knee-jerk reactions put under a microscope and dissected in front of an audience.
But wait, if we are pausing the tape every single time there is a moment of friction or a micro-rupture in the room, the group must constantly be dealing with incredibly toxic, heavy emotions. What specifically is triggering these pauses? I imagine it's rarely a moment of overwhelming joy.
Oh, absolutely not. It is almost entirely triggered by the sudden emergence of the inevitable negative.
The inevitable negative. That brings us directly into the territory of normalizing negative emotion.
Yes.
Because the publications on MBT state clearly that while the relationship is the central engine of the therapy, every single relationship on Earth features negative feelings. They don't shy away from it, they just lean right into it. The text provides a specific litany of these feelings that arise in the group.
And the vocabulary they use is very deliberate. What are the specific words they list?
Okay, it says everyone inevitably feels disappointed, abandoned, misunderstood, rejected, shortchanged, failing, or overlooked.
A very heavy list.
Yeah, and these are the exact toxic feelings that cause therapy to stall or cause patients to ghost their therapists and just drop out entirely.
And if we zoom out, they're the exact same feelings that cause decades-long marriages to end in bitter divorces, childhood friendships to dissolve into total silence, and families to stop speaking to each other over Thanksgiving dinners.
This raises an important question, though. I have to play the advocate for a polite society here because this whole concept goes against everything we are conditioned to do.
How so?
We are actively taught from early childhood to swallow these exact feelings in order to, quote-unquote, save the relationship. Like, if I'm at a dinner party and I feel overlooked by the host, I don't tap my glass, stop the dinner party, and announce, I feel overlooked and disappointed by you.
Right, that would be a disaster.
I smile, I bear it, I eat my food, I say thank you, and I complain to my partner in the car on the drive home. We are socially conditioned to believe that expressing raw negativity destroys the bond. But the publications on MBT assert the exact opposite. They say that avoiding these feelings is what actually destroys the therapy. How does burying the negative destroy the process?
Well, we have to draw a hard line between superficial peace and genuine connection.
Okay.
Polite society demands superficial peace. It demands that the dinner party goes smoothly at all costs. But superficial peace breeds unspoken resentment. And the text uses a very specific translated Dutch term for this feeling, tekortgedaan.
Tekortgedaan. I really like the weight of that word. It translates roughly to feeling shortchanged or unjustly treated or given the short end of the stick.
It is a heavy, lingering feeling. So if you feel tekortgedaan in the group therapy, say, the therapist cut you off to let someone else speak, and you do what polite society dictates.
Yeah.
You swallow it, you smile, you nod.
Let's brush it off.
But that feeling doesn't evaporate. Emotion that is suppressed doesn't just vanish into thin air, it ferments.
It rots in the basement.
Exactly. And as it ferments, you retreat into certainty. This is the absolute death of mentalizing. You sit in your chair, silently brewing, and you become absolutely 100% certain that the therapist is maliciously ignoring you because they favor the other patient.
You embed a whole narrative.
You become certain that the group thinks you are stupid. And when you are certain you know the malicious intentions of others, you have completely closed off your mind to any alternative reality. You are trapped in a state of what MBT calls pseudo-mentalizing.
Pseudo-mentalizing.
Yes, you think you're reading their minds, but you're really just reading your own paranoia.
And when mentalizing stops, the therapy is completely paralyzed. You are just a group of isolated people sitting in a room, secretly resenting each other.
Exactly. So by actively hunting for these taboo, impolite feelings and explicitly dragging them into the open light of the room, MBT neutralizes their destructive power.
They take away the secret power of the resentment.
The therapist is essentially modeling a radical new way of interacting. They are saying, it is entirely okay that you feel disappointed in me today. I see that you feel shortchanged. Let's look at it together.
That is a staggering concept. To have a figure of authority look you in the eye and say, it is okay that you are disappointed in me.
It completely normalizes the fact that feeling misunderstood is a feature of human connection, not a bug. If you walk into a relationship expecting it to be perfectly attuned 100% of the time, where the other person intuitively meets your needs without you ever having to ask.
You will inevitably feel abandoned when they inevitably fail to read your mind.
Exactly. MBT teaches that the rupture in the relationship isn't the problem. The inability to repair the rupture is the problem.
The rupture is not the problem. The inability to repair it is. That needs to be on a billboard. Because if you follow polite society's rules and you never admit that you feel rejected, you never give the other person the opportunity to repair the bond.
You deny them the chance to make it right.
You just walk around silently furious that they haven't apologized for an injury they don't even know they inflicted.
Precisely. And in a group setting, this is profoundly healing to witness. Watching someone else in the circle express that they felt overlooked by the therapist, and then watching the therapist handle it gracefully, without getting defensive, without punishing the patient, without the world ending, is incredibly therapeutic.
Because it proves empirically that negative feelings do not have to be lethal to a relationship.
Right. So when the therapist is rewinding the tape, they aren't just doing it to catch a cognitive error in Sarah's thinking. They are doing it to prove to Sarah's nervous system that the relationship can actually survive her negative emotion.
Yes, they are building a resilient relational container. They are proving week after week that the bond you share is strong enough to hold the anger, the disappointment, the profound feeling of being done, and the fear of abandonment without shattering into pieces.
It's about building trust in the repair process itself.
Which really brings this dense clinical theory directly out of the textbook and into the listener's living room. Because this framework isn't just about what happens in a circle of plastic chairs in a psychiatric clinic. It is a lens for how we interact with our spouses, our children, our difficult colleagues, and our friends.
It applies to every bond we have.
And the publications on MBT actually conclude this session's material with a specific homework assignment to drive this integration home.
It is a very practical, boots-on-the-ground application of the here and now.
The mandated homework in the materials is this. Over the coming week, you must actively track and write down how you react when you feel that someone in the group or someone important to you in your personal life abandons you, disappoints you, misunderstands you, or fails to truly see you.
It is an exercise in rigorous data collection on your own internal world. You are becoming the scientist of your own reactions.
Then I really want to challenge you, the person listening to this right now, to actually take on this homework. For the next 7 days, instead of just defaulting to your usual autonomic reaction.
The fortress.
Right. Instead of just getting angry and firing off a passive-aggressive text message, or instead of just withdrawing, crossing your arms, and giving your partner the silent treatment when they fail to understand a story you were telling, I want you to grab a physical notebook. Write down exactly what happened, write down the micro event, and then write down your immediate internal reaction.
Observe yourself with curiosity rather than judgment. Notice the physical sensations in your body, the tight chest, the hot face. Notice the immediate, lightning-fast assumptions your brain makes about the other person's intentions.
Ask yourself, are you instantly jumping to certainty? Are you assuming they meant to hurt you or bore you or reject you?
Catch yourself in that microsecond before the psychological fortress locks its doors. Become your own referee. Blow the whistle, run over to the monitor, and rewind your own tape.
And as you practice this over the next week, as you start to notice how desperately your brain fights to avoid the pain of being misunderstood, I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder.
We spend a massive amount of our life energy trying to protect ourselves from the vulnerability of rejection. But if our absolute deepest fear in human connection is being misunderstood or abandoned, what would happen if we radically shifted our perspective?
What if we treated those inevitable moments of friction and misunderstanding not as the disastrous end of a relationship, but as the actual necessary starting line for a truly authentic connection?
What if the exact moment you feel profoundly misunderstood is the exact moment you are finally being invited to be truly known?
In the next episode, we will continue with Session 10, titled Anxiety Attachment and Mentalizing. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to follow us to stay up to date with our latest episodes.